Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Sunday Messages. We are going to talk about one of my favorite topics today, which is daydreaming. And the reason why I feel so strongly about this topic is because I give a lot of my creative credit to my ability to daydream. And this is one of those things that is really people are very quick to dismiss the idea of daydreaming or think that it's ridiculous to be doing something like that. But what you want to keep in mind is that God, the universe, divine source, is only going to meet you as far as you're willing to daydream. So if you're cutting your daydream off at the knees, or if a daydream is trying to make its way to you and you're batting it away, that is actually stunting your own evolution. It's not truly stunting it, it's just making it more difficult for it to drop into your reality. It's going to be very difficult to create something different if you don't allow yourself to fantasize in some capacity. The fantasy component of creation is, I would argue, it is the most important. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a visual person. I'm highly visual. So I can imagine a lot of things. I can basically build a whole world in my mind. That's something that comes really easily to me. But that is not what's important. If you are non-visual, maybe for you it could be more storytelling. Maybe it's just getting yourself excited. Maybe it's just how you're talking about something or just prompting yourself with, oh, it would be really cool if this happened. This would be really awesome. I'm so excited to experience something like this. Those are also what I would consider to be a fantasy or a daydream. It just looks a bit different depending on what your personal imagination is like. So it doesn't need to be full color vision like mine. It can look a lot of different ways, but the bottom line is you have to be willing to go there before the reality presents itself to you. The reason why I'm doing this topic today is because this is one of the big things that opened up on a whole new level for me when I did Apex the first time. A couple housekeeping things. In this moment, I want to remind all of you that Apex starts on May 1st, and that is a sharp start date. This is the last week to get in because we start next Sunday. One thing that I do want to mention, I know a lot of people have asked me about the next round of Apex, when that's going to be happening. Right now, my plan is to run it again in October and November. But just know that if you really struggle to do something like that during the holiday season, make sure you factor that in. And the spring round will probably be better. So make sure you apply, get in. We can get started. We will do our prep call this week, and then we start on Sunday. So it's going to be epic. It's going to change your life. I will see you inside. The next thing that I want to mention is that I have 2 classes that are percolating right now. They're just in the incubation chamber. But if you want to get notified, all the details, the links, all of the good stuff just being sent to you immediately, sign up for my newsletter. Everything just comes to you in a neat, tidy little package on Sunday mornings. And on top of that, I do a reading every single Sunday. So if you want that, if you want some magic in your inbox, sign up for my newsletter. People love my newsletter. It is one of their favorite things. And I love having things to look forward to in my email inbox rather than just like clutter, but actually something that I enjoy reading. And so that's what I like to infuse my newsletter with. So anyway, I will see you on Sunday mornings if you happen to sign up for that. This is the number one thing that I notice about daydreams. When people start to feel the daydream coming, or they start to fantasize, or some images drop in, a lot of people are so quick to just bat it away, to just shoo it away like a fly. However, if a negative thought enters your mind, oh my God, you will cling to that thing for dear life. And this is the piece that we completely have inverted. So for whatever reason, call it historical patterns, family of origin, blah, blah, blah. We have made nightmares and negative what ifs and horrible self-talk more legitimate than the good stuff. In reality, the negative fantasies that you have are not more legitimate than a positive daydream. So when you say, what if I run out of money? That is not more legitimate than what if I have more than enough money? Both of those statements are equally as possible. But because daydreaming and fantasizing and hoping and optimism and all of these things that are on the positive side of the spectrum have been demonized, dismissed, and disregarded, there is this habitual gravitation towards, what if I run out? What if this bad thing happens? What if this bad thing happens? What if this bad thing happens? And I promise you, this is not the way that you want to be playing with your imagination. Now, on one hand, the things that you're imagining are a consequence of your emotional and energetic state. So if you're in a really high emotional, energetic state, you're going to be receiving more positive daydreams. And if you're in a really nasty mood and you're not feeling good, then more of the doomsday thoughts are going to drop in. But the thing that I personally see people doing that is the biggest killer of manifestation is, as soon as there is a whiff of a daydream that comes into your experience, you kill it. A nice little fantasy walks through the front door, and then you start saying shit like, that's not realistic, or that's not reasonable, or, oh, I can't do something like that, or I can't have something like that. And you murder this amazing fantasy that was going to drop into your experience that was actually a breadcrumb on the trail to getting you where you want to go. Because, like I said, in order for you to get into really elevated spaces in terms of creation, manifestation, just building a life that you're proud of, whatever that looks like for you, your fantasies have to be in that zone. And so if you're constantly cutting them off at the knees, you're doing yourself a huge disservice, because these daydreams in large part are how you're going to expand. So the constant contradiction, the constant shutting down when these daydreams are trying to float into your experience, you're simply holding yourself back. Holding the daydream back is holding yourself back. During the first extended consumption fast that I did for that first Apex protocol, I really started feeling the amount of space and time that I really had available to me in a way that I never had before. One of the natural consequences of not consuming was more fantasizing, more daydreaming, because your mind is going to go places. Your mind is meant to be on. You're supposed to think. That is something that we do all day, unless you're in a really intentional meditative state where you're practicing non-thought, which is one thing that, of course, I practice as well. But then there's all of this other time where other things have the opportunity to drop in. And because consumption was not interfering with my emotional state at all, because you can imagine, like, if you want to feel terror, turn on the news. Like, if you really want to have a rotten day, you should consume a lot of news. And then all of your imagery, all of your thoughts about yourself, other people, your financial state will be reflective of the catastrophic frequency that is the news. So the imagination and forecasting piece is something that's on a lot more than you give yourself credit for, or it's on more than you probably realize, which is why when I'm talking about daydreaming, you're going to be fantasizing something. You're going to be thinking about something. Your brain is going to be forecasting something, the only question that you need to ask yourself is, does this help you or harm you? Because the obsession with problems, the fixation on problems, and all of the mental, what if this bad thing happens, doesn't prepare you for the worst. It just puts you in bed with the worst. The next natural question that I believe a lot of people will have at this point is, but what if I don't have good mental control over the imagery that's dropping into my mind? If that's your initial question, then you're going to want to emphasize the emotional pieces more. Make it emotional. Focus on feeling better emotions, and thoughts may or may not take you there. I'm not going to unpack that fully because I could go on and on and on about that, but that's the simplest way for me to put it. Don't make it about the thoughts unless you can find thoughts that are more supportive that you can buy into. That's number one. Otherwise, you're going to want to focus more on the emotional side of it. So, for example, if you are still dealing with some really intense trauma that's super activated right now, well, trying to get control of your mind is going to feel like herding cats. So that wouldn't be the first tool to bust out in that situation. So you're really going to want to just evaluate where you are. Is directing thought something that feels easy to you? Is that something that you do have better control over? Or is it something that just feels like an absolute nightmare that you're not buying into and you're experiencing a lot of frustration around? I promise you that the more you focus on the emotions take care of the daydreaming components. If you're feeling better emotionally, terrifying imagery is not going to want to find you as often because you're not compatible with it. I just wanted to address that here. If you're struggling with mental focus, you wouldn't want to jump into really active daydreaming. You probably don't want to summon a whole bunch of daydreams if you're in a shitty emotional state. The thing that needs to come before the daydreams in order to do this really effectively is being in an emotional state that feels really good to you, that is conducive to the things that you want to imagine. And the other thing that I would highly recommend is having a meditation practice where you have better control over when to pump the brakes on your mental body. Because if you don't meditate, if you don't have something where you're flexing that muscle really, really consistently, then when you're having a hard time or when you start to feel like the thought forms are really tipping into a negative space, if that muscle, that mental control muscle is atrophied, you're going to have a really hard time stopping. And one of the best things that you can do if you're starting to feel that tip into negativity is simply stop thinking. Like, that is a priceless skill that I think so many people should prioritize. Because if you can really flex your ability to not think, then it will spare you all of the grief of tipping over into these nightmare situations that your brain wants to feed you and that your brain wants to imagine. If you have those two things down, then daydreaming in a way that's effective all of a sudden becomes much more available than it was before. So that's kind of the groundwork before you can really shift into coming into a daydream every day. You want to make sure that you have better mental control and that your emotional state is where you want it to be. The next thing that I've noticed is that there are different levels of imagination and different levels of daydreaming. So what I mean is, there are certain things that you do want to come before bigger manifestations. This is something that I had never really considered before, but in my own life, it's become more and more present. So let me explain what happened to myself personally. So before I had this house, the house that I manifested now, it was very difficult for me to daydream about my life in a way that existed beyond the house, because the house, my living situation, is such a crucial piece of everything else that I do. It's a really important part of my life. So fantasies and daydreams about other dimensions of my life, if it was really, really, really off topic, then it became available. But for a lot of my fantasies and my desires and my daydreams, it wasn't easy or even visible to me when I didn't have this house. What I didn't see before was that having desires about other things that would be interfered with via my living situation before I had the house meant that the daydream was kind of off limits. I wasn't able to dream that far and really feel it in my body and experience it in my imagination, because let's say I wanted a second car and I didn't have this house. Well, back when I was living with family, getting a second car for whatever reason would not have been something that would have even entered my mind, and it's not something I could have fully allowed myself to desire, because the interruption of, but what about parking, would have been the next immediate thought that was on the heels of that desire. So the desires, they're there, whatever they might be, but if the logistical pieces keep interfering, then it's you kind of don't want to touch it. So the interesting thing and unsurprising thing was, before I had the house, when I would get into a really good emotional state, my daydreams revolved around the house. They were all about my experience of the house and swimming in the pool and cooking in a beautiful kitchen and what it would be like to wake up and have coffee every morning. Those were the types of daydreams that I was having, because those were the daydreams that I was ready to receive. So really consider this for a moment. The daydreams that you receive are manifestations. And I am absolutely sure that you've experienced this yourself. If you think about something that you really want, but maybe you've never experienced before, sometimes it can make you angry. It can give you a really strong sense of discomfort, or it can trigger a lot of old wounds if you start drifting into territory that you've never been or that feels really unlikely. I experienced this a lot in my romantic life. There were certain things that I literally could not imagine happening. It was completely, if you were in Fabric of the Universe, it was super, super ultraviolet. So anytime I even got close to imagining something like that, it would bite me. It was really venomous when I would get into those areas, and I had to stay away from it for a long time. There are daydreams that I'm receiving now that are of a romantic variety, where 2 years ago, I never, ever, ever would have been able to think that or touch that or imagine that or receive that daydream, because it would have been too much. It would have been too intense. I was not prepared for a daydream like that. Because this has been such a significant practice of mine, now I use my daydreams as a metric of success. How far I can daydream is actually an indication of my personal growth. How far I can imagine is an indication of what I'm stepping into, how far I've evolved, how far can I stretch myself and expand myself. So if you want to get an idea of what is oncoming in your life, one of the best ways to identify that is just figure out, how far can I daydream without feeling pushback? Because that is going to reveal to you what you're ready for or what you're stabilizing yourself in. So let's talk about stability in daydreams. You will fully understand what you are ready for if you can hold yourself in a daydream with absolute certainty, absolute knowing, zero contradiction, and dare I say, a pinch of relaxation. Like so much knowing you can actually relax. If you get yourself to that space, then you're in full alignment with that daydream, whatever that might be. The next dimension of this would be how stable are you in it consistently? So can you go to that daydream, of course, when you're in a good emotional state, but can you go into that daydream on a regular basis and feel good about it and feel stable about it on a regular and consistent basis? If the answer is yes, you're ready for it. If the answer is yes, you're aligned to it. If you're shaky, then you're still stabilizing yourself to that daydream, to that frequency. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm just giving this to you so you understand how to measure it yourself. What you want is to be able to drift into this daydream and hold it and know it and feel good about it consistently, like every single time. If it's kind of a mixed bag, then that's an indication that you're not quite stabilized in it yet, so you probably don't want that thing to show up quite yet. The stability that you feel in the daydream is going to also reflect how stable the manifestation is as well. Unstable manifestations, if you're unstable in your emotions around it and your confidence around it, then the results you're going to get are also going to reflect instability. Money is probably the biggest example of this. This is the easiest thing to kind of wrap your head around when it comes to stability. It's that experience of, I have the money and then I manifest a bill, or I had the money and then I spent the money, or I had the money, I got this huge lump sum of money, but now I'm dealing with the same bank account look that I've been dealing with before. That's just instability within your own energy. That's all that is. It's nothing more complicated than that. So understand that your ability to hold a daydream is an excellent indicator of where you're going, which is why I'm such a huge advocate of letting yourself daydream more. Not only that, but one of the things that I find myself doing now a lot more often, and I think I've spoken about this before, possibly on another podcast episode, was when I feel a daydream come in, I will literally drop everything that I'm doing and just marinate in that daydream. I'll just hold it for as long as I can. Hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it. Enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it. Feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it. And see where that takes me. I don't necessarily have to do anything with it, but just the practice of holding it for longer, feeling it longer, experiencing it and being in it longer is the game, because that's what's cultivating more stability within you. And so a lot of people are like, a daydream, like I don't have time for this. No, I make time. Why not let yourself go there more often? I'm sharing this because this is such a large part of my creation process, and this is one of the biggest tools that I personally use. And so if you can get really good at this, it's going to take you to some really epic places. One of the best things about daydreaming, in my opinion, and this is what I was doing a lot of during the last round of Apex, I was giving myself a lot of time to meditate. I mean, I was in meditation maybe 2-3 hours a day, which some people would say is too much, but I don't care. I was allowing my meditations to take me wherever they wanted to go. I was just allowing myself to drift into all sorts of different fantasies at this time. And what ended up happening was I was in so much pleasure and so much bliss during these meditations and during these daydreams that it completely eliminated any sense of separation or distance from the things that I desired. And that is really the trick. Because once again, if you say something is far away from you or something isn't here yet, then you are emphasizing the separation. You're emphasizing the distance. And when you emphasize the distance, that just doesn't feel good. So daydreams allow you to shrink that space and shrink the distance. And so that's where a lot of the magic was happening, was in my ability to consistently shrink that space. And because I was so in the flow, I was feeling amazing. I was super blissed out. Everything was feeling super good. I had the ultimate confidence in everything that I was creating. The ironic thing about it was that the rest of my life ended up becoming way more satisfying. It wasn't something where I was really emphasizing these daydreams and then I would go into my quote unquote real life and then experience disappointment and frustration. Because keep in mind, if you feel something that potently and you're that stable in it, it has no choice but to land. And remembering that part didn't make it so that I wanted to escape my life. No. This was an intentional, creative practice that I was engaging in. It was not something that I was using to numb myself. So this leads me to the next point, because I had a client who was really worried about this. She was like, I'm in these daydreams, I'm in these fantasies, but I do feel a little nutty. For, in so many words, that's what we were really talking about is, am I nuts for spending this much time daydreaming? And it's like this fake life that I've completely fabricated. Are you sure that this is good for me? Two things on this note. One, if it is feeling good and you're able to carry that feeling into your real life, then all of that goodness that you're already calibrated to is going to bleed over into everything else. So in that sense, it is always going to serve you. And if you can carry that confidence and knowing that everything that is happening in those daydreams is what you're aligned to and it's going to drop in, if you can do that, then all of a sudden that knowing is extending into the active living life hours that you're experiencing. So you do want that sense of knowing to extend throughout larger and larger periods of the day, because knowing is the most potent, non-contradictory energy that you can hold. The places where people start to get into trouble with daydreaming, I've said this before, you want to kind of take a standard approach to daydreaming that you would addiction. So what I mean by that is, if you want to understand, is this good for me or bad for me? Is this helping me or harming me? Then ask yourself, how is the quality of my relationships? Or is this damaging to my quality of life? Is this damaging to the quality of my relationships? Is my health suffering? Am I neglecting myself? Is there anything coming from this daydreaming that is actually harming me? If something is causing harm, then yes, that is a red flag. However, I've never had a client who, because my client daydreamed more, all of a sudden that meant that they were neglecting their responsibilities and not taking care of their children. That has never happened. Okay, so I do know that maladaptive daydreaming is a thing. And I want to be clear, that's not what we're talking about in this discussion of daydreaming. So once again, if you're ever wondering, am I doing something too much? Is this actually harming me in some way? You want to look at the elements of your life, the quality of your life, the quality of your self-care. Just really be honest with yourself about whether or not something is having a negative impact. However, for the vast majority of people, the thing that is harming you is the constant focus on things that scare you and the what ifs that scare you and the what ifs that are in negative anticipation of problems. That is doing more harm and more of a disservice to you than actually letting yourself go into some places that you actually want. So if you are going to be using mental forecasting and daydreaming and fantasizing for something, let it be good. Because the more you get warm and cozy with the things that you want, the more you invite them into your life. So start getting comfortable with all of your dreams and desires, for God's sakes. Just enjoy basking in them, enjoying them, fantasizing about them. Really fall in love with the fantasizing part of this creative process, because if you can do that, then 1, things are going to come much faster for you. 2, you're not going to be in pain from this idea that you are somehow separate from your desires. And it's also going to positively impact the rest of your life. So try it out. Give yourself just a little bit more room to daydream more often and see what happens. See what happens. Experiment with this. And I am so excited for everyone who is going to be entering May and June and be doing this consumption fast with me in Apex. I'm super excited because, oh boy, the daydreams are going to erupt when consumption is taken out of the mix. So again, this is the last week to get into Apex. If you want in, we're going to be together for 2 months. It's going to be extraordinary. I'm so stoked for everyone who's inside. And that is all that I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please leave me a glowing review if you feel inspired. And if you know someone who would like to hear this, if they need to hear it, if you think it would support them in some way, I always appreciate you sharing these podcast episodes with people. It helps me grow. And I just appreciate you all so much. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will talk to you next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.